Our next speaker is the wonderful Margaret Boersma from Canada, and it's been absolutely fantastic to get to know Margaret over the last year or so and to hear the stuff that she is doing with teachers as she's working with teachers to help children develop resilience, develop that understanding of those social and emotional skills. And I'd love to hear from you, Margaret, a little bit about how you got into this work. What's your background?
Well, my background is as an elementary teacher, actually. So kindergarten to grade 8 is what I specialize in. But throughout my career, I have loved doing teacher workshops. So it started like that. And I just love those aha moments that I see in the faces of teachers when I give them new strategies that they could try the next day with their students. It's the same aha moments we all experience with our students too. And it doesn't matter if they're adults or kids, right? Mm-hmm. So then when I actually was at the age of retirement, I decided, instead of doing it part-time, I would do it full-time. So that is what I'm into now. And then I realized there's a whole new learning curve to being an entrepreneur. So it's taken a while, but it's coming and I'm super excited. I get to travel when it's not COVID. And I've traveled to your place, to New Zealand, and I've done a big project a year ago exactly now in Holland as well. And they want me to come back to teach even more of their teachers. So, but they would like to do it in person. So I am waiting.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the things, isn't it? You're saying there about the becoming an entrepreneur and it requiring a whole new set of skills after years in the education system. So yes. If you're thinking about that or anything else that you've seen in your life, what do you see are the current challenges in the education system?
Oh my goodness. The education system is still predominantly reflective of the industrial era, where we had to have all the students learn how to be not just cooperative, but compliant so that they wouldn't mess up the factory lines. And we're still expecting compliance. And there's more and more pushback from the students who are now learning online and love it. And they're looking at some of the ways of learning at school and are thinking, this isn't relevant to me. So it's really time that the education system got updated in a number of ways. And that is my focus in what I'm doing now with teachers. So,
it's interesting you're saying about the children that are the students that are learning online and loving it, because some are really loving it and being able to take their interests in lots of different ways, often outside what the schools are trying to get them to do. Whereas others are really struggling because of that isolation, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And I think when I mean learning online, I'm not only talking about the work they get from their school teachers. I'm also talking about self-directed learning that students wouldn't even call it learning, but they're learning tons online and, in their spare time. And, I have a young adult son who, this is an example of something that can happen later. Like he's 25 now, but he spent 5 years in a chemical engineering degree and got it, but only partway through his degree, he decided he was more interested in economics. So when his degree finally finished, he said, and now the real study begins. And he was completely self-taught in economics and in writing. And now he's a writer for the Federation of Economic Education in the States. So this is what kids are doing now. I don't think he's an anomaly. And I think the education system doesn't serve our kids. And if they're not confident enough to go for it anyways in another way, like he did, then we let them down and they don't get to shine their light as an adult even and make the difference in the world that they're meant to make.
Absolutely. And that's part of that, discovering who he is, discovering those passions and so on, which has taken him quite a few years. So and that's another reason to be doing these conversations right now, is helping teachers to be able to help students find who they are and see those different strengths outside of the subjects that they're teaching and so on much earlier if at all possible. So okay, next question then. What do you wish you'd learnt at school?
Oh my goodness. I wish I had learned, first of all, practical social emotional learning strategies that I could apply, because I was feeling inferior and not able to learn in the way that I was being taught. And that was part of the reason I lacked self-confidence. And then, you know, the students on the playground who tend to play the role of bully, and there's a lot of reasons for that, they can spot the victim like on the other side of the playground, right? The person who's not feeling confident. And so I was picked on, and I didn't have practical strategies to use. And that's one thing I really wish I had learned. And I also wish I had learned in areas of my strength. I found that there was a lot of emphasis on like, you know, about the different intelligences that Howard Gardner put out, right? So we learn in traditional schooling a lot about mathematical, logical, and about linguistic learning. And that's like reading, writing, spelling. And I didn't do well in those areas, but I wasn't allowed or even knew to learn them in a kinesthetic manner, for example. And I'm a kinesthetic learner. So I think we can embrace all learners if we expand the way we teach. So I wish I had had the way I teach now and what I'm putting forward as a child. And that's what motivates me.
Yeah, fantastic. And that's led you into the work that you're doing.
Yeah,
so
indeed.
I'd love to hear about the work that you're learning, and you've given me some questions to ask you, which is fantastic. So you're committed to fostering that resilience and that emotional intelligence, as am I, and talking about those the students needing those real life skills, the things that we can use in everyday life, way beyond the subjects and so on that so many teachers are teaching in schools. So you've got an idea of what a better education could look like. Can you tell us about that?
Okay. In general, it is it's whole brain learning. So utilizing the different parts of the brain, the way we see babies come into the world, they know how to express themselves without using words. So physicalizing. It turns out that, you know, you can turn the sound off on a video and you know the child is throwing a temper tantrum and that they're angry. That's a physical expression of how they're feeling. So children come into the world, you know, scribbling all over the walls. So that's kind of a form of visual arts, banging on the pots and pans, that's musical. So all the arts, and pretending is the greatest thing for kids. And how do we utilize their innate ways of learning and put it in a way that children of all ages can learn? And so embodied learning is something I'm really fond of. And that is becoming a character inside a story, for example, physicalizing it as well, because that uses the parietal lobe, which is not really attended to, is not utilized enough by most teachers because they're uncomfortable with children moving around. And so we're placed in the seat and need to be compliant and learn by listening. But if you have, for example, an auditory perception problem, which I had as a child, learning through movement and discovery and play is how one learns naturally. And especially students who have some kind of issue that prevents them or makes it even more difficult to learn in the traditional manner. So yeah, so I don't know if that addressed the question, but
yeah, that's interesting because many of our primary schools in New Zealand here are heading in towards play-based learning. And so, you know, being able to have those play activities set up, if you like, and then to be able to encourage learning through exploration of those activities. And it's been a huge change for many of the teachers. I think it's much easier in the early childhood space where we've had that play-based learning, child-initiated play for a very long time. But yeah, it's a totally different way of learning, and for teachers to understand that the children are learning so much in that space. So fantastic.
And I think in the early primary grades, you know, free play is part of play-based learning. But I think as children grow a little bit older, like grades 1 to 8, for example, and beyond, doing intentional guided play is a fantastic way of learning. And I call that living inside a story.
Right.
So when they can get out of real life for a little while, empathy gets built when they are inside a real story, having to problem solve as the characters would, not knowing the end of the story. The end can be the student's ending, but just allowing for that space to grow and develop and understand different perspectives and build empathy is so incredibly powerful, and it's not forgotten. I had a student once who learned that way when I first started teaching that way. And she had a major accident with brain damage. And people told me, don't worry about Stephanie, because, you know, she is probably not going to remember you. And I had been away for a number of years. And she did. She remembered everything I did. She said, I remember, you know, about that erosion unit where we were the town council and we had to figure out the different solutions to this local problem that we really had. And she knew it all.
Yes.
And that's just a testimony for this type of learning.
Absolutely. And there you can really see that embodiment, can't you? The living inside the story, and how powerful, because it means if you've done it into that situation, they've got the skills to be able to take that and to be able to put that into another
apply it to real life. And we always come in and out of role, reflecting on real life and how that makes a difference in the world, in our personal lives, or in other texts or mediums. So important to help them make those connections regularly.
Fantastic. Okay, so you also talk about it being really important to prepare children before going into the story. Okay.
Yes.
So, can you share an example of that?
Yes. Okay. So here I'm just going to give you an example of this unit that I just created. And most of the time when I do a virtual workshop, it's a unit that I've already done with the children. But I happen to know this author, and she has released a brand new book called 111 Trees. And it's based on a folktale, an Indian folktale with a really good message. And so the pre-learning that I would do really it's kind of like spiral teaching, where you introduce little concepts, but then you see them come up again once you're in the story. So I'm just going to refer to my notes for a second, just to give you an idea. So one thing I teach inside the story is a social emotional learning technique I call be, do, have. Right. And it's a way of getting yourself ready with the right attitudes and the right frame of mind so that you can do what you need to do so you can have the success that you want. So here, and I think it's probably worldwide, teachers need to display the success criteria for each lesson or each unit of work. So what does a student need to do to be successful today? And so I use that as a pre-story activity. And so we list the expectations, and the units that I do are cross-curricular. So inside here, it's a literacy unit. So I chose from our expectations that we need to teach in our curriculum documents, some of the criteria for the kids. And then I put it into Kids Speak, something that they would understand. So we have an arts document, for example, and one of the criteria in Kids Speak now is create a movement piece using the creative process, and then refer to the movement elements. So space and effort are the two elements that I suggested for these criteria. And then I did one for drama, and I did one for literacy, oral literacy, and for written literacy, because there's a writing component in this unit on the 111 trees as well. And so then you get the kids to take all the verbs or the doing words or the action words and put them in a column. So that's slide one. If you can get it up, then that would show you what I'm talking about.
Okay. Can you see that?
There it is. Yeah. So it's a 3-column thing, and you do the middle column first. And these are the actions. So I need to create something to be successful. And it's a movement piece because you discuss each of these words in context. And I need to use something. I need to refer to something. I need to participate fully. I need to examine different perspectives. And it goes on like that. And so then I have the student say, realize that if they can do all these things, what would they have? So that's the column on the right, that's slide 2. So that's the result or the outcome. If they can do all this, they would have success, or they might have good grades. And you co-create these with your students. Okay, you don't just tell them all this. They have to think, you know, if you can do all this, what would you have? Well, we would have fun, yes, and the learning would go deeper, yes, and we would learn how to work with others, and we would learn different ways of showing our learning, not just through writing, for example, like, you know, tests, and appreciate different ways of learning. So then, but then we say there's a column missing here. You have to arrive a certain way to class, for example, in order to be able to do these things, so you can have those things. And that's slide 3. And that's a way of being. So it's the attitude, right?
Okay. Trying to find that slide for you.
So the kids will co-create this. I'll just keep talking while you figure it out. So the kids would say, I need to listen carefully, and we need to make others feel heard. And then you talk about what that looks like and what that sounds like. You know, looking at the speaker, not interrupting, those kinds of things, giving my best effort, cooperating with others, appreciating the perspectives of others, being creative, in a mindset of being creative. So this is all mindset or attitudes, building on the ideas of others. What does that look like? What are follow-up questions? And so you can see how this can go into older children as well, right? Willing to explore new ways of learning. So and I say to them, you know, if you can come to class like this, then you're going to be successful, because you're going to able to do this, and you're going to have these results. And honestly, I save this activity for usually the second day that I come in as a visiting person into a class. I usually do these units in 5 half days, but teachers can spread them out. It's a normal length unit. But yeah, and by the second day I do this activity, and it changes everything. It changes the whole dynamic in the class. And class management is so much easier, because all we have to do is refer to this chart.
I can see so many similarities with many of the classrooms now are developing classroom treaties, if you like. And here is your classroom treaty. And I love the link that you have here with, okay, this is our classroom treaty, but look at the results that you can get from this. So it's making it even more explicit, if you like. It's not just this is how to be a good friend type thing, but actually this is how to be a good friend and to achieve success and to learn much more and to be able to bring more ideas into, and to be able to question more things, and, you know, with your examine and your generate and those sorts of things. So it opens. So
I'm glad it resonates. That's great. And I like that, the term a peace treaty, or is that what you called it? A treaty?
Called it a classroom treaty. Yes.
A classroom treaty. Yeah.
Yes.
That's cool. It brings in the whole Indigenous, and we're focusing on that in Canada now too. So, so another pre-activity I would do for this unit is something called 4 corners. So you may have heard of 4 corners. I put like really famous thought-provoking quotes in each corner of the room. And I have students read them and decide which one resonates the most, which one speaks to them the most. And then they stand underneath that and they talk to the others about it. Why did you come to this group? And what, you know, so they're talking specifically about the quote and why it resonated for them. And then one of them becomes a spokesperson and speaks on behalf of the group to the rest of the class. And so that's really a minds-on activity. We haven't entered the story yet, but it really gets them thinking. And the quotes are all about the theme of the story. So the theme of the story is, in this case, is success. Like how are you successful? So this activity that I did with the Be, Do, Have comes back inside the story when the character has to gather their own strength and get some resolve. And how do they do that? They know to do the Be, Do, Have. So that's how it's spiraling around in our unit again. And then in the handout that I gave, it's pretty detailed. I gave a couple of other options for pre-story activities, but it really helps to bring them in to the story, and they'll recognize their work and have a deeper appreciation of the story because of the pre-story work.
Mm-hmm. It is so important, isn't it? Preparing that ground. And it's interesting you're using the quotes there, because many people in New Zealand, we use whakatoki, or which are proverbs from Māori culture, and they are really useful for helping people to understand different ways of be, do, know, being, doing, and knowing. Do you, yeah, and being able to have those conversations around that. So I love being able to use those quotes, those ideas. Yeah.
They're pretty profound. I love working with quotes too. I do it often.
Yes. Have we finished with the slides here?
The next one is actually the author, I believe, doing the reading of the story. No, that's not the next one. That's the one before, I think. So that's it. So we'll talk about that next. So I wouldn't normally read the story to the children ahead of time. Even if I'm doing a unit with adults, I don't read the story ahead of time. Why? Because I use the story as a provocation. So I might use the setting and the characters in the story, and they become those characters. But then the story often takes off in a direction that might not be what the author did with the story. And it doesn't make it right or wrong. It just makes it stronger because the class owns the story and the direction of the story. So when you get really skilled at what I do, you really don't need the story except for maybe for the setting and the characters and the problem. So, but the solution the kids have to come up with, and that can take a number of activities. So the type of, this isn't just my own methodology. This is actually called process drama. So it's not theater at all. It is a whole bunch of strategies that help embody the learning. That's a summary of it. And I think in the handout I put a link to an article that describes it really well.
Yes.
And otherwise I can provide it. So what we could do, because we're teachers, and teachers do have to read the whole story when they're trying to create a unit like this, let's listen to what the author's reading of the story. And she might be a little bit hard to understand, but that's okay. You'll get a little appetite for it, and then we'll dive into it.
Now, this book tells the story of how one village celebrates the birth of every girl. Now, to give you context, I want to read the preface to you. Not too long ago, a village in India was ruled by ancient customs. There, the birth of a boy was celebrated with the beating of pots and pans and the sharing of sweets. A son was a blessing from the gods, someone who would carry on the family name and take care of aging parents. The birth of a girl was welcomed with silence. A daughter was a burden, someone who would cost parents a dowry. That's money given to the groom's family. So when she got married, she would become the property of her husband. But today things are different in that village. Today, one girl is equal to 111 trees. This story is true, and it started with a boy named Sundar. Now, as a boy, Sundar Paliwal witnesses the struggle of those around him, how irresponsible mining ravages the countryside, how ancient customs and beliefs cause gender inequality and discrimination. He dreams of a better life for all, both boys and girls. So years pass, Sundar grows up, marries, and becomes a father. When he's elected the village head, he proposes a plan that will both heal the land and honor girls. So this is his plan. Every girl born in the village will be welcomed with a planting of 111 trees. Now the villagers reject his idea. They argue, they are afraid, they just don't understand. So I'm going to read an excerpt from here. But Sundar keeps talking to the villagers. He shows them how the factory is slowly destroying the land. He tells them of other nations where girls and boys are treated equally, where there is plenty of water and electricity and enough wealth and knowledge to go to the moon. He even offers to plant the trees in the girl's name himself if the villagers promise to send their daughters to school and wait to marry them off until they turn 18. Slowly, very slowly, the villagers begin to understand that by welcoming girls and planting trees, they might bring balance back to nature. So I hope you get a chance to read the book, 111 Trees.
So really interesting listening to that. Thank you for sharing that link with us. Now, we're talking about inquiry, teaching that way of thinking. How do you do that with the kids? How do you do that with your students?
Okay, so after I do the pre-story work, then I get into the inquiry. And I just give them the inquiry question, but then we work together to get some essential questions out of that, and I'll explain that. So the inquiry question for this unit is, how should we treat all living things? And by the end of the unit, I am hoping that they'll discover that all living things deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. This particular story has an environmental theme, but it also has, so you're going to treat the environment a certain way, but it also is linked to appreciating girls. And so now there's a movement, I can't remember what it's called, but she says it at the end of her book, where school for girls, for example, is linked to the growing of trees in the village. And that's what this folktale is about. So how should we treat all living things? And the kids kind of discover that throughout the unit. I create a chart, and it has 3 columns. There's no slide with this. It's just, I know, I think, I wonder. So together as a class, we fill it out. So what do you know about that inquiry question? How should we treat all living things? What do you know? And so we make a list, either on Post-it notes, or we just write on a piece of chart paper, and we leave that up for the entire unit. And what do you think? So what are your theories about it that you're not sure of? And then the most important column is the I wonder. What are you wondering about? And so the discussion will lead to the I wonder questions. And those are the essential questions. Those are the questions that every day you visit this chart, you see if any of them have been answered in our work together, or you add more questions. So the idea is to have students constantly asking questions and looking for answers and giving that appetite, even to do research, if that's what it means. And I like to have a research component in every one of my units. So this unit is really geared to, I would say, I don't know, about 10 to 12-year-olds, I would say. So they're capable of doing some research as well. You could do it with slightly younger, and you can certainly do it with older kids as well. Okay, so that's the end of the pre-unit stuff, and then we go into the story.
I love that question, I wonder. And I use it with all sorts of ages of people, actually. I use it with preschoolers, I use it with adults,
Yes.
I use it with people of any age, because
of course,
it gives you permission to think about other things, you know, and to actually think about what is important for you. What do you want to know? What do you wonder about? And yeah, it's a really opening question, isn't it?
It's good to do think, pair, share too, because sometimes kids are reluctant to share what they wonder about, depending on the emotional safety that you've built in the class. So think, pair, share is a really good way to do that. And then, you know, you can even get the partner to share what their partner said rather than their own idea, which really makes them have to listen too, right? So you're really training them in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay.
So then, so then I'll take you into the story, okay? And we'll just highlight some things. I won't go through everything. That's in the handout. Yeah. So I love embodied learning as a way of starting. And sometimes children that are, 12, 13 years old, they don't really want to do, like, I never call it dance, but in our curriculum, it's called dance. And what it is creative movement. So it is not your typical dance forms that we're doing with the students. It's allowing them to find comfort in their bodies, to realize they do express themselves physically and their feelings and their ideas, and that that you can train that. It's like giving them another tool with which to express themselves. And I learned later as an adult, that is my favorite way of expressing myself. So I have taken a lot of dance classes as an adult because we couldn't afford it, as my parents are Dutch immigrants, no money. But I'm just saying that the way I'm teaching is the way everybody can learn. Like kids who are really good at the traditional ways of teaching sometimes struggle with this, but it puts them on an equal playing field. And the kids who are often hard to manage in class, they're the ones that shine in this kind of learning, and they actually become cognitively a whole lot more aware and can contribute answers in conversations because they've embodied the learning first. So I start with an embodiment activity. So in this story, and I've written it all out in script form for the teacher who's not used to this. And if the students aren't used to this, I told them how to scaffold it carefully so that you can have a sense of comfort with this. But you enter the story. The story starts with the people are all in the field and they're working hard. And so let's show that we're working in a field. And so we might brainstorm some words like hoeing and weeding, and everybody finds a spot in the room by themselves, which in younger children I would call their bubble, but in older children I call it their kinesphere. And they can face a wall because they don't want to be self-consciously looking at others, and they can close their eyes as long as their feet are fairly planted and they don't bump into people. So I take you through that, and the kids are really into it. Sometimes they put background music on, like working and drudgery kind of music. I never use music with words because that's too much to comprehend. They're trying to get into their own space, and the words are too dictatorial. So I always use music, but I use it with no words. So that would be the first activity. And then I would play like mood music for pulling weeds and hoeing and planting. And that's what they did every day, these people. Or they went to the water, to the well to fetch water, which took hours back and forth in a day. And it was the woman's or the girl's work to do it. So we experienced that in our bodies, and what is that really like? And so I like the music, Pachelbel Canon, for that background. And if you have half the class, once they've developed like a little movement sentence, you can have half the class show the other half of the class. And that is really neat because they get ideas when they watch other people. So that's the first thing I do. You can videotape it too, for the kids to do self-assessment. Did I use the space? Because I develop words like how you're using the space with different levels, high, middle, low. What kind of effort are you putting into it? Does it look like you're really hoeing, or are you just kind of, not showing the effort that's involved? So we develop movement vocabulary through this activity as well. And then we get into the story. So, yeah.
Just as an aside, I can see so many useful things here when you're talking about really getting to know different, again, coming back to the different ways of being, doing and knowing.
Yes.
And being able to, what does it look like, life in a different country? What does that person's life look like? And actually almost having to do the learning about, people that maybe have not gardened before.
Yeah, exactly. They don't always know.
And being able to do that, I wonder what they'd do.
Yeah, exactly. And what does it feel like to be working in the hot sun all day in a place like India? It could be anywhere. You don't even have to say where the place is, actually. Anyway, I'm just going to read a little bit so you can get a flavor, a few sentences, because it leads into the next activity, and you get a flavor of how the author describes the story. It's really beautifully done. So I'm reading from this book. Sundar, that's the main character, watches how his mother balances the water pot on her head. You can see it, good. Walking to the well with her every day in the blistering heat is hard, but it's his favorite thing to do. It's the only time he has her all to himself. So you can stop at different points and do some activities with it. So what kinds of things would Sundar talk about with his mother when he has her all to himself? And then we generate a list on paper. And then we use one of the essential questions, or the I wonder questions, such as maybe one of them is, why do girls not get to go to school in some countries? And that is maybe not a question that would come up in the brainstorming. And you can use one of the children's brainstorming. I think it gives much more validation to the whole thing if you use one of theirs. But I'm just coming up with this one. I have had students say things like, I wonder why parents argue and are disrespectful to each other. I've had grade 7 students have those kind of questions come up in the I wonder column. So it's very meaty, it's very deep. And that's where I want to go. I find a lot of teachers they are so overloaded with expectations they need to cover. It's hard to go deep. And I think if you integrate a whole lot of subjects in one 3-week unit or 5 half-day unit, you really can go deep with it because the theme is the same. And then you can grade for different subject expectations. And that's what this is all about. So then I'd have the kids do a role play. Person A would play the parent and person B would play Sundar as a child. So Sundar might say to his mom, why do girls not get to go to school in some countries? And then the mom would have to come up with an answer. And even though students don't know the answers, they pretend that they know the answers, and it's okay with them because they're enrolled. They don't need to know it because they're enrolled. And so that's one of the rules of role play. If you don't know, you make up a plausible answer. And that's a skill in itself, right? And you have to listen to the feedback that you get. So the conversation is two-way. And so that really, it trains not just empathy, but it trains real listening skills. And then after a few minutes, I just cut it off. And then in the meantime, I have gone around to a couple of different groups. And if I see anything that I think, yeah, these kids are ready to share, then I'll ask them, would you, not in front of everyone, but before I stop everyone, I'll say, would you just share what you just did again? And we're going to pretend that we're eavesdropping in on your conversation. And if you do that with a number of groups, then you build a collective knowledge and your story gets built. And then sometimes you have to choose one, of those stories to go with in your quote drama, but in your story. So that's an example of a role play activity that's fairly safe. It's only in partners. Everybody's doing it at the same time. Nobody feels like they're being singled out. So you want to build that emotional trust so that eventually you can have people be singled out and they're totally fine with it. And I can do that within half day. It's incredible how fast that can happen. Yeah. And then, it continues like that. I build in like environmental issues, like because this story is so focused on environment, I introduce the 4 laws of nature. And the 4 laws of nature is something that teachers can expand on. I don't know what it's like in New Zealand, but in Canada, at every grade level, we have an environmental curriculum. So this would fit in with any grade level. So the 4 laws of nature are, there is no waste in nature. And so they can talk about that, building examples of that. Everything is connected. That's number 2. There is no such place as a way. For example, pollution, affects us all. And the earth has limits. And so you can flesh out those ideas and bring it all back to the story. So the story is kind of a springboard. But then what I like to do is, and then you could have different groups, each focusing on one of those, and you could have them do some research. And then you can put it into a song. And I've done this with kids before, where they actually have to, in their group, they have to change the words to a typical tune. So one group might do a song like, change the words to Frère Jacques, or I don't know what you call it there, Father.
No, it's fine.
Frère Jacques, okay, you know it. All right. And then another group would do Row, Row, Row Your Boat. And another group would do Poor Bird. You might not know that. And then another group is Hey Ho, Nobody Home. And I like using those 4 tunes because they all go together. You can sing them all at the same time and it sounds gorgeous. And it's really not that hard. So that is reinforcing the learning. And if you do a sharing assembly, you can use those songs in the sharing assembly, and it adds variety, right? Then rather than just, but there's movement components in it. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then you can do embodied learning, like tableau work, which might, in a lot of countries that are hearing this, they're not able to, because we have to be physically distanced, but you can, and you could do it in a different manner too. There's a visual arts option. So inside the story, the ground becomes really barren. Sundar ends up working in a factory, and I think it's a marble factory, and they're stripping the land of all the trees, and the people are going hungry, and the crops aren't growing because of the pollution. And so Sundar has already, I should back up, he lost his mother due to a snake bite. So there's a whole lot of things in life that didn't work out for Sundar. And so, the kids need to imagine how they would feel in Sundar's shoes. But if you can't do the tableau work, you can do the visual arts. So create a barren landscape, reflect on times in a villager's life when it might have felt barren, and write an artist statement about it. And so there's all these ways of building your, what you need to do anyways in your curriculum, into a story that has a lot of meat to it.
And giving the students and the teacher to be able to really explore what's going on for these people in their lives. And it's real, isn't it? It's real stuff.
It's real. It's real. It really is.
That's quite scary for teachers, actually, because you don't necessarily know what's going to come out. And if you've created a safe enough environment, then you can give your students a real opportunity to, if you've created a safe enough space.
Yeah, so I work on that with teachers too. Like the first half day I come in I do a lot of creating that environment through games. And I have, if you remind me, I have a really good handout for that with games at different age levels that I can share. But I might need a reminder. But I'm happy to do that, because there's fun ways to create that emotionally safe environment.
Yeah, great. And it comes back to many of our teachers here, talking about that classroom treaty that we mentioned.
Yes,
and that's part
it does.
In that space.
Yeah,
so,
it does. And the kids want deep learning as much as the teachers want to go there, right? And we often don't go there as teachers, but the kids want that too. They love it.
Because it's real.
It's real.
That's one of the things that I see, is that so many people are crying out for stuff that is real. And you get what do I do with this stuff? How is this relevant to my life? The number of people that have said to me, I don't care about calculus, or when am I ever going to use this stuff? And that's what so many teachers are battling with. The students are just at school for eat their lunch type thing.
And yet you're lacking in so many skills they really do need.
Well, that's right. And I mean, it's one of the reasons why we're doing this is that my son said, I have wasted 13 and a half years of my life. And that's honestly how I felt.
To read.
Because when you get to this year, 13 and a half years of his life, and he can't use anything. He did say a couple of weeks later that, reflecting on that, learning to read, learning to write was useful, but he didn't spend 13 and a half years learning to read and write. So, this is stuff you're talking about, isn't it? It's those real conversations, and putting the learning that the opportunity, this time that we're spending with these students, and making it real for them.
Exactly. And we need to make it practical. Like your son knows that he isn't using calculus in his everyday life. So he's questioning, and rightly so. We want to raise critical students. And yet when they start questioning what we do as teachers, then we don't really know how to respond. And this is a way of responding.
Absolutely. Okay. So we've talked about some of the things that you do to help those lessons being brought out for the students, but is there anything else that you want to bring to tell us about in terms of how you bring those lessons out?
So thank you. So inside that story, Sundar ends up quite despaired, and he sees that his whole village has gone to nothing, and the villagers are dying. And he comes up with an idea, and he shares his idea, and the villagers say he's crazy. There's no way that's going to work. And they do whatever people do who have a lot of disrespect for someone, you know, with a crazy idea. So that's where this be, do, have comes back in, only it's inside the story this time. So how does Sundar get his resolve? Just like we all need to get resolve when we're not towing the party line, or we have an idea that stands out from everyone else and is not accepted at first. So we ask the kids, we say to the kids, this is what Sundar's asking himself. All right, how would a successful person be? Okay, so we've been talking about success even in the pre-story activities, and there's others I didn't talk about, but it is about success. And I know success has a lot of different definitions, and we get into that with the kids being able to express it themselves. But if Sundar wants to change his village around to be a healthy environmental state, and he cares a lot about girls not being treated equally and justly. He also lost a daughter in the story, which I skipped over, but because I'm kind of giving some examples here and there. But honestly, he had to ask himself, then he could think of creative, if he knew how a successful person could be, then he could think of creative things to do so that he would have the results he's looking for. And that is a deep SEL strategy that people don't realize. And I could divert from the story to give you a real life example. My husband was in a seminar called the Success Seminar, and he learned about this kind of stuff there as well. And he really wanted our family to have a vacation on a cruise sailboat. And he looked it up, and it was way too expensive to rent for a week. So then the boat show came up. Once a year we have a boat show here. And he said to himself, I'm going to look up and do some research and find out what it might cost to buy a boat and put it in a rental program so we can get the money back. And anyways, he asked himself, what would a successful person do? And how would a successful person be? So he decided he was confident, he was inquisitive, and in action. I think those were the three. So 3 words: confident, inquisitive, in action. He went to the boat show. He toured these boats that were all set up, 35-foot boats, 3 little bedrooms in it, incredibly cute. And right beside it was a rental company. And he said, what kind of boat would work best in your fleet and get rented out the most? And then he decided, now I have to get Margaret on board. So a day later, I was at the boat show. And first of all, when he first said that, I said, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And he had already done all that research. So he had his answers ready. And then I went to the boat show. And 2 days later, we had bought this boat and put it in a rental program. And we get to use it in off season, June and September, and July and August is summer here. So then it gets rented out and we reimburse our cost. So, you know, he never would have done that if he hadn't learned the be, do, have. Mm-hmm. And he wouldn't have thought of creative things to do if he wasn't already in the right state of mind, because we shut ourselves off.
It's very powerful, and more people are talking about that. You know, who are the successful people? Who are the people that you admire? And so often those people that you admire have very similar characteristics than you underneath, and yes. So that's part of the reason why you admire them. So you can use them, if you like, as a role model for growth and for finding that way through, which is really fantastic. Okay. Sure. So, Margaret, you've talked lots about this wonderful way of teaching and helping students to be able to live inside the story and to be able to explore the real issues that they are experiencing in their own lives, the questions that they might have, and to be able to explore answers together with each other, which is almost co-creating answers that are real. So and I know that you do this work, but how can teachers learn more about this way of teaching and bring this sort of way of teaching into their own practice as well? Because I'm sure we can use so many different stories, not just 100 stories.
Oh no, I have done a lot of this work over the years, and a lot of the units I've done are on my website actually. But recently I have created a wonderful way of supporting teachers in learning this type of thing. And I call it the dynamic teaching model. And if you picture like 3 circles of a Venn diagram, the first one is SEL. So social emotional learning, we need to do as teachers. We need to do it for ourselves. And of course, when I do these kind of programs with teachers, we always talk about, well, how do I do that with my students? And of course that comes up, and of course I'm going to tell you, right? Like, and we're going to figure it out together. But I've done a ton of training in this over years, and I'm so excited to roll this out. So right now I have registrations for a parent program, because we are in a triangle. We have to support the student. There's parents and guardians, and there's teachers. And teachers need training. Parents and guardians need training in order for the student to succeed. So I'm doing parent programs on social emotional learning and teacher programs on social emotional learning right now. And soon I will be rolling out the methodology that I just shared with you, which is the practical side of giving students an opportunity to practice their social and emotional learning skills so that they can apply it in real life. If we don't give kids a chance to practice, and the same with adults, if we don't practice first in some kind of a role play or something when we're calm, we won't be able to access that when we're triggered or activated. So this type of integrated learning works better with the elementary model because of schooling, because in high school, at least in Canada, we still go from one subject to another, you know, on a rotary basis. So it's not as easy, but it still can be done with high school as well. Okay. And then those two end up in the third circle, which is implementation. And that is like an advanced professional learning community, which hasn't been established yet. So that is the dynamic teaching model. And I can't wait to write all about it. But I love serving people in different parts of the world. So I'm happy to do it through Zoom, which is a little bit harder, but I have co-taught these kind of classes using the internet, so I don't even have to come. But because they're so interactive, the teacher needs an active role in that, of course, right? So yeah, that's how you can get more of it.
Fantastic, and we'll share all of those links and the links in the through this conference as well. It just made me think of something as you were talking about that, and that is that you identifying that social and emotional learning and doing that with the teachers. And I'm finding that with teachers, with parents here in New Zealand, is that often they will come to courses to be able to learn about how they can do the stuff with the children. But just as you identify, actually, there's a massive gap in our learning, because we went through this education system which didn't teach about social and emotional learning. And our children, in a way, are lucky because they're starting to get that stuff. I have run a lot of programs with teachers, and they'll say at the beginning, you know, I came to be able to fix the students, but by the end of this program, I've fixed me, and they're so much happier, healthier, loving their job, inspired to do more work with the children. And it's that depth of understanding of their own emotions and that understanding of what makes us social beings and how to connect with others. So thank you very, very much for the work that you're doing with teachers and the result is with these amazing young people setting out into the world. So thank you very, very much, Margaret.
Yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Fantastic.
I look forward to serving your community should the opportunity arise, but we can work out a time that works.
Yep.
I know your time zone's totally different.
They sure are, but that's all right. Okay.
Okay.
Very, very much.
Thank you.